The infamous Tower of London is not just famous for its countless tales of luxury, banquets, and daring escapes. Built as a Norman fortress and a royal palace in the 11th century, the Tower of London was the location of London's most famous executions. Anyone considered a traitor, spy, or threat by the crown was sent to the tower to be imprisoned and tortured, or in some cases, executed. From beheading and death by hanging to shooting by firing squad, these are the most shocking execution methods used in the Tower of London.
Welcome to Unveiled History.
The Tower of London was built by William the Conqueror in the 1070s. Following his victory and coronation as the ruler of England, William the Conqueror decided to build a massive fortress to defend England's borders and to proclaim his royal power. This magnificent stone fortress, which eventually took 20 years to build, became known as the Tower of London. The king pulled masons from Normandy, who brought with them stones from Caen in France. But the actual labour was provided by Englishmen. For William, the fortress would not just dominate England's sky, it would also dominate the hearts and minds of the people. And over the years, the Tower of London became associated with the symbol of state authority and power in England. With each passing king, the tower was adapted and expanded to defend and control England. Between 1216 to 1272, for instance, Henry III expanded the tower, adding huge defensive walls as well as a series of smaller towers, and a massive moat. He also painted the tower's Great Keep white, making it the White Tower in 1240. Aside from defence, the tower was also used to protect the crown and its possessions. Kings and queens often locked their valuables and jewels in the tower. Even today, the crown jewels are protected by a garrison of soldiers. Arms and armours were also made and stored in the tower until the 1800s. It wasn't until the Middle Ages that the crown began to use the tower as a prison and location of execution. Most of the captives were either executed within the tower or outside the castle, in public, on Tower Hill. For over 800 years, many men and women arrived at the tower uncertain of their fate. While some stayed for only a few days, others stayed for many years until they were released or executed. During the Tudor period, the Tower of London became the most important state prison in England, and anyone deemed a threat or traitor to the crown was sent to the tower. Among the famous people sent to the tower were the future Elizabeth I, Lady Jane Grey, and Sir Walter Raleigh. Interestingly, the first prisoner to be imprisoned in the tower was also the first person to escape from the tower. His name was Ranulph Lambard, the Bishop of Durham. In 1101, Ranulph escaped the tower by climbing out of a window of the White Tower using a rope smuggled to him in a gallon of wine. For more than 800 years, the Tower of London held a vast array of prisoners from highborn to lowborn. It held Scottish kings and French dukes, young princes and princesses, lords and ladies, archbishops, common thieves, and politicians. But each of these prisoners had varying levels of experience ranging from luxurious to lethal, depending on their class. Wealthy and influential inmates were mostly held in relative comfort, deprived only of their liberty. Some captive kings, such as John Balliol, even brought a host of servants. Some others were allowed to go on hunting trips or shopping trips. But prisoners accused of treason suffered much more. They were tortured and in some cases executed. There were three main instruments used for torture: the rack, the scavenger's daughter, and the manacles. The rack was the most widely used instrument of torture. It was designed to stretch the victim's body and eventually dislocate the limbs. Victims were first shown the rack and then questioned. It was only used if the prisoner refused to answer. It is commonly said that the mere sight of the rack made prisoners surrender. Aside from the rack, the manacles are also commonly used as a torture device. Manacles are iron handcuffs worn around the wrists of prisoners. The prisoners would be suspended by the manacle with his feet off the floor for a long period of time. This resulted in great pain and discomfort for the prisoners. By the Tudor period, the Tower had secured a great reputation as the foremost state prison in England. While the tower has since been synonymous with executions in England, the reality is that only 22 people were killed within its walls. This was because executions were usually a public event. The authorities used it to deter future wrongdoings, and the British people for some reason enjoyed watching them. Often, spectators would throw rotten food at criminals as they walked down the execution block, or simply show support for those they loved. Executions within the walls were reserved for people with high status and royal blood, or for those whom the crown wished to make quiet and quick work of. It was often seen as a merciful way to die in privacy, within the walls, away from the crowds. Among those executed within the walls were Margaret Pole, whose headsman took 11 blows to end her life, William Hastings, who was beheaded for treason against Richard III, and 3 Tudor queens, including Anne Boleyn. Anne Boleyn had stayed in the tower in May 1533 to prepare for her coronation. 2 years later, she was back in the tower, this time accused of infidelity to the king. She was sentenced to death for treason and subsequently beheaded. Outside the tower, Tower Hill became the perfect location for executions. It was chosen thanks to a man called Simon of Sudbury. He was a chaplain to Pope Innocent VI and the Archbishop of Canterbury. In 1379, Sudbury introduced a nationwide tax to pay for the 100 Years' War with France in 1379. But the people of England revolted against tax and against him. On June 14th, 1381, he was dragged from his residence at the Tower of London and hauled up to Tower Hill, where he was beheaded in front of the baying crowd. Unfortunately for Sudbury, it wasn't a clean cut. It took about 8 frenzied sword blows to remove his head from his shoulders. This was how Simon of Sudbury became the first person to be beheaded at the Tower of London. From that time till the next 400 years, the Tower Hill became the choice site for an execution, and beheading became the most common method used at Tower Hill. It was so considered the most dignified method of execution, and so it was reserved for high-profile prisoners or those accused of treason. Among those who were beheaded include John Tiptoft, who was beheaded in 1470 on the charge of extreme cruelty, Sir Thomas More, a one-time confidant of Henry VIII who fell from grace, and Lord Lovat, supporter of the rebel Jacobite cause. Lovat became the last person to be beheaded on Tower Hill. Besides beheading, hanging was also occasionally used as an execution method, but it was reserved for the lower class and common people. Among those killed by hanging were Henry Peckham, a Tudor courtier, and Mary Roberts. While Henry had plotted a daring heist to steal £50,000 from the Royal Exchequer, Mary took part in the Bloody Gordon riots of June 1780 and was caught. Sometimes, prisoners of the Tower were also burned at the stake, but this horrific fate was reserved for those who had committed religious crimes like Richard Witch and John Goose in the 1400s, or for espousing heretical views like John Wycliffe, the 14th century religious reformer. However, the most extreme form of execution was death by hanging, drawing, and quartering. This brutal method was reserved for those who had committed the most heinous crimes. It usually took place somewhere outside the city. First, the victims would be hung by the neck until they were almost dead, and then they would be revived and placed on a table where their body would be cut open. The entrails would be removed and set on fire. Afterwards, the corpse would be divided into 5 pieces. The head would be placed on top of London Bridge and the 4 quarters of the body posted in the 4 corners of the city. One of the famous prisoners who was executed using this method was Guy Fawkes. Guy Fawkes was part of a group of conspirators who had planned to assassinate James I during the state opening of Parliament. Unfortunately for Guy, he was caught by the guards who found him hiding in the cellars beneath the Parliament, surrounded by gunpowder. Guy was brought to the Tower where he was imprisoned and tortured. Afterwards, he and his fellow conspirators were hanged, drawn, and quartered, with their body parts disparaged around London as a warning for others. While most of the executions took place during the medieval period, one execution took place during the Second World War. This was the execution of Joseph Jacobs, a German spy, who had been injured while parachuting into the UK. He gave himself up to be treated, and afterwards he was charged with treason. On August 15th, 1941, Joseph Jacobs was shot dead by a firing squad. He became the last person to be executed in the Tower of London. If you enjoyed this video, please smash the like button, drop a comment and subscribe to our channel so you'll be the first to know when we upload more videos like this.